Hey, this is Attorney David Henn. This video is going to be a little bit longer than normal. We're going to talk about the Indiana Officer's Standard Crash Report that's used in Indiana whenever there is a collision between vehicles or between a vehicle and pedestrian. This is a standardized form. If you're involved in an accident, you can access the form for your accident at a website called buycrash.com. That's B-U-Y crash.com. It'll cost you $12. You'll need to know either the number of the accident report or the name of the participant and the date of the accident in order to access it. Let me enlarge my screen here a little bit so you can follow this along. So this number that you see at the top, 903-403-325, that is the report number for this accident report. If by chance you're able to find that number from the police officer, you can just simply punch that into buycrash.com and it'll pull up the report. So this report is organized in a very particular manner. It can be a little bit confusing, so I'm going to see if I can move through this somewhat quickly to help you understand what it is. At the top of it is going to be the date and time of the accident and the general location, including the nearest city limit or town, and the general intersection where the accident occurred. For example, this was at the Walker ramp on US 36 East. It'll identify the drivers involved. Here we had two motorists, driver one and driver two. This is a motorcycle accident that resulted in a fatality, so this accident report is kind of done in a very particular way. Just beneath that, we have a grid system where the officer is going to use his judgment in determining what he believes to be the cause of the accident. Over here on the far right, we have the basic general area of the accident. This was a rural area, daylight, clear, dry surface, straight grade asphalt road. In this grid system, the officer assesses what he believes caused the accident. And so the first grid here on the upper right, vehicle contributing circumstances, this is things that were wrong with the vehicle that could have contributed to the cause of the accident. Lights being out, brakes failing, steering failure, engine failure, whatever. Here the officer checked none because none of that, there's nothing wrong with the vehicles that caused the accident here. Next down is environmental circumstances. This would be things like snow, ice, glare, animals in the roadway, debris in the roadway that could have caused the accident. Again, the officer here checked none. What we typically see the most play with is this grid system on the left in the center of page 1. This is the driver contributing circumstances. This is what the drivers did that contributed to the cause of the accident. And you see, we're identifying the drivers by vehicle 1 and vehicle 2 for driver 1 and driver 2. And here we find that vehicle 1, according to the police officer, was following too closely, and that was the primary cause of the accident. Driver vehicle 2, according to the officer, did nothing to contribute to the cause of the accident. The officer also checked this box here that says other. So the biker of the first motorcycle on this accident report evidently did something else in addition to following too closely that contributed to the cause of the accident, at least in the officer's estimation. We'll find that in a rear-end impact, the officers will check the box that says following too closely from the simple principle that the moment of impact, the following vehicle was following too closely. Just underneath the grid system, we have the ballpark estimate by the police officer of what the total damage to both vehicles was. And here he gives a broad range of $25,000 to $50,000. Both of these motorcycles were destroyed in the impact. And then finally on page 1, we find where the officer will include witnesses or other participants in the accident or non-motorists that were involved, such as a pedestrian. Here, there were several witnesses. In fact, we're going to have another page of witnesses later on in this report, where the officer recorded their name, their address, and phone number, and where they were at the time of the impact, so we know their vantage point. Page 2. The officer says that this was a rear-end collision. That was a type of crash, and here's more information. He was notified at 12:58 and arrived at the scene just about 8 minutes later. Two officers, one from the state police and one from Park County Sheriff's Department, responded to the scene. They're still, at the time this report was made, they were still preparing their investigation, and they took photographs of the accident scene, which is very normal in a fatality. Just underneath that is a narrative, and this is the officers explaining what they witnessed when they got to the scene and what the witnesses to the accident told them what had happened. And this is where we find a little bit more explanation about what the officer heard that may have caused him to check that other box on the first page when he was assessing the cause of the accident. Here there was two things. A vehicle may have been passing the two motorcyclists, and the first motorcyclist may have been slowing to allow that vehicle to pass, and the following motorcyclist did not see him slowing down. But the other witnesses indicated that the first motorcyclist actually came to a stop to execute a left-hand turn. It's also curious that one witness was passing them from the opposing direction on a motorcycle and gave them the motorcycle wave. And so we might find that following motorcyclist in this collision was distracted giving the motorcycle wave to a passing biker, and took his eyes off the road and didn't realize that the first motorcycle was coming to a stop to make a turn. On page 3, we have the information regarding the bikers and their motorcycles. And again, start up here at the top with the name, address, date of birth, and driver's license number of the first motorcyclist. This would be the motorcyclist who was following in this accident. He wasn't wearing a helmet. He was thrown from his motorcycle, and he sustained fatal injuries, and specifically severe bleeding from his head. Following this information is his license information with any restrictions. And here we have the bike he was riding. It was a 2002 Harley. His VIN number and information for the registered owner. Over on the right, we will find if anybody was cited for any type of violation, whether it be a traffic ticket or a misdemeanor or felony, it would be included here. But here the officer, of course, didn't cite the motorcyclist who was killed in this accident. Just beneath that, we'll find that the officer indicates the initial point of impact was the front center of the motorcycle, and the damage occurred all the way throughout the length of the motorcycle. That makes sense because these motorcycles were totaled in this accident. For the biker number 2, who was in front and was struck in the rear end, again, this would be where his information and license number would be found. Over here it says he was wearing a helmet. He was thrown from his motorcycle. He suffered incapacitating injuries and was transported by ambulance. He had bleeding in his lower extremities. Standard in a fatality accident is the surviving motorist will be given a breathalyzer or an alcohol test. And that was administered to biker number 2. It was a breath test. He blew 0.00, so he was not driving under the influence of alcohol. Here we find his bike identified. He was riding a 2012 Kawasaki, and here is where the registered owner information would be found. And just as before, he wasn't cited for any violations. The initial point of impact was to the rear of his bike, and his bike was damaged throughout its length. On page 5, this is an additional page that the officer included because he had so many witnesses. You don't always see this page on a standard accident report. But this is where they would list out all of the different witnesses and their point of a view of the accident itself, along with their addresses and phone numbers. And then finally, on the final page, the officers will prepare a not-to-scale scene diagram of what they witnessed when they arrived at the scene. This shows biker number 1 following biker number 2. There was a skid mark, and then obviously a point of impact would have been in here. There was a debris field that the officers found when they arrived at the scene, and this is where biker 1 and biker 2 were found when the officers got to the scene. If you're in an accident, it's important that you pull your accident report and you review it for accuracy, both in the circumstances of how the accident happened, as well as the information that identifies you and the other motorists. That information will be very important when it comes with dealing with the insurance companies, as well as dealing with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. I hope this helps you understand the Indiana Standard Officers Crash Report. If we can ever be any help to you, of course, you're welcome to reach out to me. But as always, stay safe, enjoy the ride. We'll talk again later.